Commissioner Shepard, Commissioner Briscoe doesn't look like he's quite on yet, so let's give him another minute.
Okay, sounds good. Is anybody here interested in providing public comment today? Okay, see Mr. Houston. Rob, you can get that on his list. Anyone else? Okay, we'll make another call for it.
Commissioner Shepard, Mr. Huston probably wants to talk about the item that's on the agenda. You have the ability to have him talk then or now. If he'd rather talk during the item, it might be more timely.
You got an echo?
Is your mic on? Your computer? It just started, so I'm guessing you're not muted.
I'm muted.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of echo there.
With respect to the timing on this, the only thing I will say is that I need to leave for another appointment before right around 5:30. So if there's an opportunity to handle that issue earlier, I'd be willing to wait till then, as long as it gets done by then.
Okay. Well, I think we'll just have you provide comment during the regular public comment period, and then if we have additional questions, we'll come back to you. I think we'll get to that item before 5:30 anyway. Thanks. Okay, looks like we are all here. All right, this is the Port of Bellingham Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, November 3rd. This is Commissioner Shepard, and there continues to be a Whatcom County public health emergency that is still in effect. And accordingly, we have multiple ways to participate in this meeting. There is a conference dial-in and a Zoom login. I'm going to go ahead and start by closing our executive session and opening the public meeting with our roll call. First, Commissioner Briscoe.
Here.
Commissioner Bell.
Here.
And Commissioner Shepard is here as well. Before we get started, folks might know there is something else happening today. It is election day, and I just wanted to give a shout out to thank everybody who is participating in the election, and to just give a shout out to our Whatcom County auditor and our elections department for all the good work that they've done. We have a fantastic voting system here in Washington State. Everyone from the Secretary of State to each of the counties that administer voting. We've got voting that we can do conveniently, safely, and securely, and I really appreciate that. So I want to make sure to thank those hardworking officials, all their staff, and all the volunteers that really make these elections come together. And because we vote by mail primarily in Washington State, I would be remiss to not thank those federal workers of the postal systems who make sure that we've received our ballots and they get back in a timely manner. So thank you to all. And if you haven't voted yet, you got 3 hours. Go get it done. I guess you got 4 hours here. 4 hours. I stand corrected in Washington. Okay. With that said, we are going to open up for public comment. We have some time at 4 o'clock and then again at 5:30 at every meeting for members of the public to provide us comment. We have at least one person signed up. Rob, do you have anyone else signed up?
No one here.
All right. Would you like to start, Mr. Huston?
It's Houston, just so you know.
Houston.
And thank you.
Okay.
As you would probably guess, would like to comment on the Bellingham slip reissuance or situation. And I was pondering this the other day, in that my guess is that the current tenants in the harbor are probably, commercial tenants are not probably desiring of taking over all of those slips. The problem is that if some of the remaining slips end up going into recreational, then it would provide virtually no ability for commercial to grow in the future. So the question in my mind that I mulled for a while was how do we keep some room open for commercial, but also in the short term provide as much moorage for the recreational people as possible and prevent the issue that Belhaven kind of presented in that it allowed people to jump around your list. And I came up with an idea that I'd like to at least just throw on the table as a presentation or as a thought here, and that would be to allocate slips to the current commercial people as requested and as you see fit, given the information you requested from all of us in the last meeting. For any remaining slips, the idea would be to put them into a special status where you would slide people either off of the list or from Blaine into those slips as they became open. And the rule would be that those people would have to move out of those slips as soon as another slip in the Bellingham harbor became available for them. So this would create sort of some automatic turnover of slips so that if another commercial entity wanted to come into town or some of us had an opportunity to grow, we could take those slips at that time. In the meantime, though, it would still allow the port to maintain some reasonable control over them while and help out the recreational boaters to the extent possible. I ran this idea by Kyle, the harbor master, and he said that at least procedurally he didn't see a problem with being able to do that. It would sort of be an extension of the Blaine operation as you're doing it now. So that was the idea. The main thing that we're concerned about is that we've got a situation where we've got these commercially designated slips, but some of us have slips in the recreational areas that we were going to trade out for people that move out of the commercial areas. But for like the last 5 years, there's been virtually no movement out of those commercial areas by the recreational people. So if we can turn this all back over to recreational, I don't think we'll ever see them back in the commercial area again. So that's my primary concern. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. Do we have anyone else who would like to provide public comment at this time?
Commissioner Shepard, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Kyle.
Yes, could I have a couple minutes, please?
Yes, please.
I would, following Mr. Houston, I would like to address the action item that is a reallocation of Belhaven slips. But first, a personal note. I'm referring to the discussion that took place 2 weeks ago. I was so impressed with everyone that participated in that discussion, including commissioners, port staff, company representatives, mortgage customers. It was an issue. It is an issue that people feel strongly about, but everyone was respectful, reasonable, rational. I just have to say it made me proud to play a small role in this port's decision-making process, and it made me proud to be an American. It was like a ray of local light through the national fog. I just thank you all for the way that was conducted. It's not unique at commission meetings, but I thought it was particularly timely and particularly impressive, and I thank you all for participating in it in that way. Second, on behalf of the Working Waterfront Coalition, I would like to confirm our support during this process for the charter companies that actually have the business model that brings hundreds of people to this county or even county residents, helps them safely participate on the Salish Sea and enjoy the San Juan Islands. And is such that charter business model is such a huge benefit economically to our maritime sector and our county economy. So I just want to affirm our support for the future of those especially two companies that best represent that part of the sector, San Juan Sailing and Northwest Expeditions. Good corporate citizens, effective companies, and we hope that their needs are addressed in this process. Also, we would like to express our support for some form of the allocation that has been in effect informally, I take it, the 12% allocation of slips to the charter broker sector. We think that plays an important role in providing the atmosphere that helps these charter companies succeed. So with that, I thank you for the time and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate those words, Jim, and you are a great part of our ability to make things happen here, and I always appreciate your involvement and support. So thanks for those words.
Hey, Jim, can I use the first part of your speech in a campaign ad?
We could negotiate that.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much we appreciate the feedback when we do something right, because it's rare. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it rare that you do something right or rare that you get feedback? Just checking.
I hope it's the latter.
I know where you live.
All right, anyone else interested in providing public comment at this time? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Carrie, if you would please.
Motion to approve consent agenda items A through I.
All right, are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Bell?
I have none. Thank you.
Commissioner Briscoe?
I have none.
And I have none either. It all looked fine to me. Carrie, would you please one more time?
Sure. Motion to approve consent agenda items A through I.
All right, Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Briscoe?
Yes.
And Commissioner Shepard is a yes as well. Carries 3-0. And we'll move on to our presentations. You know what, before we do that, I made myself a note to read our advisory committee meeting schedules, and I almost forgot to do that, so I'll do that now. We have two upcoming advisory committee meetings. The first is for the Bellingham, well, I guess it's just a notice. The Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee has no further meetings until 2021, so we will check back at the new year for that next meeting. The Marine Advisory Committee, or the MAC, does have a meeting in November, Tuesday, November 10th, 2020 at 6 p.m., and that will be on Zoom. Okay, first presentation, looks like we have Mr. Birdsall discussing reallocation of Bellingham slips.
Before Alan gets started, I want to clarify something because Jim Kyle just mentioned this 12%, and I hadn't thought that was a formal commission action, but we dug deep because it was referenced so many times in the last meeting, and we did figure out that in May of 2001.
I have to listen here a second.
We did figure out that in May.
Yeah, I'm listening, so I'll call you again. Good.
Hey, if you're not actively talking, we just always ask that you mute your mic. But in May of 2001, the commission did pass a motion that increased the harbor rules and regulations cap on the merchant leaseholders from 10 to 12%. So there was a formal commission action, again, that increased the harbor rules and regulations to a maximum cap of 12% on the merchant leaseholders. Your turn, Alan.
All righty. Thank you, Rob. You just stole the front part of my presentation, but that was perfect. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Alan Birdsall, Manager of Marinas. And I'm here to give you a little bit more information and just kind of re-bring everything back and summarize previous information to help facilitate the Commission's discussion and allocation on the Belhaven slips. So as Rob said, that the current max for the 12% is 12% of total Squalicum burst to go towards merchant leaseholder assignments for charter or for brokerage. 12% is 166 slips. Our current allocation is 10.7%, which is 148 slips. And this also includes a few of the slips that are assigned outside the merchant leaseholders area, as identified in the marina use plan. And to kind of go back to the 12%, when the commission approved the 12% increase for a cap, they directed staff to work with the Marine Advisory Committee to develop a procedure to get up to the 12% and how to manage the allocations. That was done and it took a year and a half or two. That was finalized in 2004. It was classified as the Marina Use Plan, and it defines the use categories within all the various users of the harbor: merchant leaseholders, recreational, active commercial fishing, and so on. And Rob showed those images on the last meeting. That's not a narrative to the Marina Use Plan. It's just the graphical images that Rob had shown. While the Marina Use Plan is an operational working document to help guide staff, it is not something that has been formally approved by the Commission, but it has been presented to the Commission a couple of times over the last years, since 2004. So one of the things that the Commission had discussed at the last meeting was looking for more information, was clarity of the existing harbor rules and regulations as far as the marine merchant leaseholders assignments go. And so staff took a look at that and let the Commission know that back in 2015, 2016, the marine merchant leaseholder rules and regs were completely rewritten. They were very confusing, very vague. It was a coordinated effort with all of the merchant leaseholder owners, at the time the Director of Maritime, and both the Blaine Harbor and Squalicum Harbor Masters. And the whole goal was to refine the regs, make them more clear. And some of the highlights from those regulations are that specifically the merchant leaseholders are strictly prohibited from charging mortgage fees that are in excess of the rate set by the port. However, the merchant leaseholders can recoup overhead costs through other management fees. Merchant leaseholder berthage is for the moored of vessels actively engaged in the charter or brokerage business. These are specifically right out of the harbor rules and regulations. And the merchant leaseholders must provide the harbor office with proof of vessel insurance that meets the port's insurance guidelines. Now, there is a line that does allow the merchant leaseholders to sub-assign on a temporary basis with written notice to the harbor masters prior to the sub-assignment. This is the one area where staff thinks that, we could probably tighten this up a little bit and require written approval by the harbor masters prior to the sub-assignment. And when merchant leaseholder businesses have been sold at Squalicum Harbor over the last, few years, since 2015 anyways, the Squalicum Harbor Master, Kyle Randolph, has met with each new owner of the merchant leaseholders to go over line by line the harbor rules and regulations for the merchant leaseholders, specifically with Northwest X, San Juan Sailing, and Belhaven. Actually, Kyle has had quite a few conversations with Belhaven. So kind of to echo what Roger Van Dyken mentioned at the last meeting, is the rules and regs, we believe, works. They are fairly clear. There's one area where we think we could tighten up and have worked with the merchant leaseholders up until Belhaven, which outwardly went against the rules and regulations. And we did go back and we called 7 other ports, 7 other marinas, kind of surveyed what they do in these kind of situations, and whether or not they allowed merchant leaseholders to have slips. 6 of the 7 did. Do they have rules for merchant leaseholders? 6 of 7 had some level of additional regulations for charter slips. We asked if they had any enforcement issues or what they did to enforce the regulations. None of them had a need to enforce the regulations. And then we also asked if they had any reporting requirements on the use of the slips by the merchant leaseholders. And again, none of the 7 had any reporting requirements from the merchant leaseholders back to the port on how they were utilizing those slips. Additionally, at the last meeting, the commission had a few various questions that they were looking to have answered or to get additional information on. One of those was how many of the existing Belhaven customers were on the waiting list before it went into receivership versus after the receivership. Of the 15 remaining Belhaven customers, 3 of them were on the waiting list prior to the receivership. Going into receivership. And then after that, of those 15, 8 are now on a waiting list or on the birth change request list. Some of the prior customers did go up to Blaine. I believe we have 5 confirmed Belhaven customers that have gone up to Blaine. So we have 7 that are not on either a birth change request list or a waiting list. 4 have indicated that they most likely have alternative mortgage if they're required to vacate those existing mortgage slips. And 3 have not provided any indication of what their intentions are or requires them to vacate. The commission had also, through the motion, asked for staff to set up temporary 30-day mortgage agreements with the remaining Belhaven customers. Kyle and his crew are working on that. We currently have 5 of the 15 back, but we keep exercising and trying to get those. And those temporary 30-day mortgage agreements we set to go through November 30th. The commission also was concerned that they want to ensure that the existing Belhaven customers had some place to go. Again, like we mentioned last week, Rob mentioned last week, Andy up in Blaine Harbor and his crew can accommodate the remaining 15 in some form or fashion. The commission had also asked that the merchant leaseholders email them directly with their request. Last week, Kyle emailed all the merchant leaseholders, let them so that to ensure that they were aware of this request that the commission had. And as the best that we can tell, the responses that have been received are through San Juan Sailing, Marine Service Center, Crow's Nest within the last hour, and then we did receive an initial letter from Northwest X back on October 1st. So we understand that the current merchant leaseholders are looking for, and this is from San Juan Sailing. They currently have 54 slips. They're requesting an additional 7 in NTI, a 50, and the rest in 40s on D West. In addition, they would like to trade their 5 or 6 slips they have on G East for D East so that they can move them in and consolidate their fleet. That would open up the ones on G East for regular mortgage. Marine Service Center, they have 0 slips. They're new in Harbor Center. They're requesting 5 very specifically on Gate 12. Northwest Exploration has 29 slips. Their letter that they sent on October 1st supports the continued use of the Belhaven slips for merchant leaseholders, but they did not address their specific needs. We understand, staff does, that they're looking for a few additional slips. The Crow's Nest, in their request within the last hour, they'd like to get 3 50-foot slips. So unless there's other interest by other merchant leaseholders that staff is unaware of, staff would recommend the following. San Juan Sailing, the 7 slips they're requesting and trade G East for the DE slips. provide Marine Service Center with the 5 slips they're requesting. Northwest X, Crow's Nest, and other merchant leaseholders combined a total of 13, and then trade the remaining, that's 25 slips, trade the remaining 15 to be assigned to the berth change request list and or waiting list, and have the Squaw Harbor Master coordinate the assignments for the merchant leaseholder's request. An additional consideration for future merchant leaseholder leases is to include the mortgage in some fashion into the leases so that the mortgage fees can be included in bond requirements. So with that, I hope this information is what the commission was looking for. And if you have any additional questions, myself, Rob, and the 2 harbor masters are on Zoom and answer any other questions you may have.
Commission, before we have the questions, just to expand on the inclusion of the merchant leaseholders in a lease model. We've had this conversation with Shirley McFerrin. We're going to start to involve the legal team. We just think it'll have more teeth if we get this involved on the real estate side. The contracts on the real estate side are more robust than the mortgage agreements. So if we can convert these from being mortgage agreements more to leaseholders, which is what they think they are, I think the enforcement becomes a lot easier.
So, Alan, you need a shave, man. Seriously.
Yep, it's coming. I think it's about time.
So, secondly, given the amount of interest, especially the last minute interest, in the commercial use of some of those slips, I would personally like to see that we open up a certain number of those and put them out for tender and say, what's the price you're willing to pay? You know, for someone to come in and say, I want these very specific slips, and for us to give them the same rate that we're giving somebody that's, you know, got to walk halfway to Lummi Island to get to their boat, is not a fair proposition. You got a commercial endeavor, and you've got numbers of them now. And I got one as late as 4:30 this afternoon, where people want to compete, or they want these slips. I want to give them those slips, but I want to do right by the ratepayer, and I want to do right by the port, and say, we're going to allocate a certain number of slips. What's your bid? And then let those companies vie for those slips. I think that's a fair way to do this. To pre-choose who goes into those slips, I think is wrong. Granted, they've got a business history with us, but in a marketplace where you've got a scarce commodity, and especially where you've got one where, you know, a company wants a very specific set of slips, that's got value because it's got high visibility. It's going to mean a lot to their business to have those slips versus having something somewhere else. And if we've got that kind of value on the port, I think we owe it to the ratepayer or the taxpayer to try to get what we can for those slips and move this into a market economy. I have now 4 new emails in my inbox of people on this issue looking to do something with those commercial slips. And I would like to see the model changed from a flat fee to something where we actually get something closer to market. And what are they willing to pay? So if you've got a commercial endeavor that's going to make money on these slips, and they have, you know, an advantage by being in that closer in slip, that's got value to the port. It's got value to them, and we ought to be able to receive that value as a port, rather than just assume we're going to reserve those for them at the typical rate. I think we're doing a disservice to our ratepayer.
Well, I would caution.
I knew
against
you were going to
getting
chip in.
Well, you know, Ken, you're right in one respect, but then in the other respect, you've got to think about the tenants and the business people that are not as big as the other guy that do need a spot up front to do their business, that can't afford to compete with a bigger company to have that spot. So what you're doing is you're pitting David against Goliath here in some cases, or he could. And I don't know if that's the right thing for a port commissioner or a port, how to run a port. I understand what you're saying. You know, we need to get as much money as we can for our slips. But then on the other hand, how do we level that playing field so that the little so-called, if you want to call it mom and pop business, can survive against the chain business? And some of these emails we're seeing are chain businesses. They're businesses that are in several other locations, you know, so they can afford maybe to pay more in our location because they're not paying as much in another location. So I'm not disagreeing 100% with you, Kim, but I am saying that I think there's outlying circumstances to how do we take care of the small guy when the big guy comes in and has got more money. The other question I would have for Alan is, what percentage are we at now? We're 12 is our cap. Are we running at 12, or are we at 10% or 8%, or what do we've got reserved for commercial use now?
Yeah, Commissioner, good question. We currently have assigned 10.7%, so just under 11%, 148 berths. The 12% is 166, and we have not hit the 12% yet.
Okay, so where's the other 1.3% bursts at? What are they being used for at this time?
When the commission set the 12% and the marina use plan was put together, there were existing long-term customers within those defined areas for the merchant leaseholders. It was decided that through attrition, when those folks left, that the berths would be opened back up or opened up to the merchant leaseholders. In 16 years, those folks are still there. So we're still waiting to work through the attrition. So that 1.3% is filled with long-term recreational customers that were there when this was put in place.
So to make sure I understood you clearly, we can't get to 12% because there's long-term customers in there. So we're stuck at our 10.7% of commercial slips. And if we give or put 15 people that are on waiting lists into those slips, we're going to decrease from 10.7 down to, I don't know what the percentage is, 8.6 or something. I don't know. We're going to go backwards if we move the waiting list into the slips, correct?
We would lower the current allocation, yeah.
I, for one, do not want to lower the current allocation. Well, we have more demand than we have spots, and I do not think it would be wise to go backwards on our commercial charter spots. So that's going to be a tough one to figure out. I know we've got people waiting, but then on the other hand, we've got people with businesses needing room too. From Mr. Houston, we heard that could be a growth issue, and I'm hoping there is. I'm hoping our businesses grow. So I want to caution my fellow commissioners as we're speaking about this, not to forget that we're at 10.7 now, but if we make a decision to reallocate those 15 slips to someone else, we're actually going to decrease our commercial slips. And correct me if I'm wrong in that.
No, you're correct, Commissioner. I do want to caution the commission, though, that there's a reason that those slips, we haven't made that 12%. The demand hasn't been there. So we've reached out to every merchant leaseholder, including some in Skagit, and we've only come up with the 25 needed, or the request for 25 new. That means that those slips, or 15, are either going to sit empty, or they're going to be taken up when there's no demand for them, which means they'll then be subleased out, and we run into the same problem we had with Bellingham. Now, Mr. Houston just came up with a pretty good suggestion that we hadn't thought of, and that is that we do some sort of interim move with the wait list, and then we get them so that they're back available when needed. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, because it seems like you may end up booting someone out of the harbor, but I think it's worth exploring, because the last thing we need is those slips to sit empty when we have a wait list of people waiting for them. And I just don't believe the demand is there with the merchant leaseholders.
And I agree with Rob on that. I think, Mike, thank you for the suggestion because it really is a good one. I also think we need to take a look at what we're doing at Blaine as far as our rate. It's better for us to get some revenue in Blaine and lower the cost of every slip in order to fill that marina than it is to have a 70% full marina with 30% empty. So we can actually reduce the rate for everybody in Blaine, I think, and fill that marina and do better on a cash flow basis. And my accountant friend Rob is saying no. However, there is a line. There is a line that you can. There's a break-even line.
Sure, there's a revenue management issue there where you lower the price, you get more demand. My problem is if you lower the price for all 800 boats up there to enough to increase the demand, you won't make out on that. I can do the math for you and show that. But there certainly is a correlation between the amount the slips cost and the demand up there. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I just think we need to take a real hard look at how we can fill up the entire marina up in Blaine. I think having empty slips in Blaine is a travesty, and we should be able to fill them with at least with weightless people, or with some kind of revenue management system. By that same token, Mike, I agree that we can move some people down from Blaine. I love the suggestion. Thank you for that, and we should look into that.
Hey, Rob, you mentioned that you looked into Skagit for other merchant tenants. Have we looked outside of Skagit, and have we done a more kind of formal request for proposals and market this opportunity? Because it really is an opportunity, and we don't have the local demand to fill it. And I'm wondering if there is something we can be gained from shopping this around and seeing what else is out there. This is a attractive opportunity, and I think I support that idea of keeping those commercial slips in commercial use because that diversity is important to how our harbor runs.
So, Commissioner, no, there hasn't been a further outreach, and we can certainly do that. We can put a little sales effort and marketing effort into this and reach down to companies in Seattle, et cetera. My suggestion to the commission is twofold. One, we do that. We reach out farther than the local area here. And two, that we sit down with Mr. Houston and others that are interested from that field, and we try and figure out what that looks like, where we're kind of temporarily leasing those slips out and how that works when the merchant leaseholders are ready to take possession of those slips. And I'll remind the commission.
I think that's a fine, suggestion. We've got that wait list, and the wait list, it's been stubborn for a lot of people who have been on there for years. If we can provide them some relief to get them in while we are trying to market this around, or see if any of our existing companies want to have further expansions, that's certainly of interest to me.
And commissioners, we do have a very similar program that Mike Houston had brought up, that over on the Gate 5 in the commercial fishing area, when we had the lower demand for active commercial fishing slips, some of those were transferred into a program very similar to what Mike is suggesting, where we would sublet those fishing berths to folks on the waiting list. Once they were assigned permanent moorage elsewhere, they had to move out, and we were able to turn a lot of those berths over. So Kyle and his crew are very experienced in that kind of program, and we would definitely like to look forward to seeing what else we could do to support expanding that.
So, Ellen, I'm in support of you maintaining a certain percentage of those slips for commercial use, and for looking at how we can move our current businesses into those slips if they need expansion. But I'm really focused on some of the rate issues and the discrepancy between what we can get and what we have been getting. So I would love to see some kind of either a competitive process or a marketplace process where we put those out and said, here's what the market is saying. Do you want to participate in that? And not just lease them as we would normally.
So once again, I got some rebuttal to that, Ken.
Stop it.
Hey, well, it's pretty simple math. You got 5 people working for, Joe's Charters, okay? So Joe's Charters needs a slip up front, and you want to charge more money and let it be competitive. So Joe has to pay a bunch more money. So Joe's got to let 2 of his employees go so that he can maintain his business. We're in the business of putting people to work, building jobs. You have to be careful with what you want to do. I get why you want to do it. We need money. Everybody needs money.
No, and it's
But
not
just
about.
be careful what you ask for, because there's that collateral damage that comes along with putting it out for a bidding war like this. We're seeing it in the housing industry now. We're seeing people that are asking something for a house and they get way more money than they did before because people are bidding on it. And maybe that's fine for that, but I don't want to see that happen with the Port of Bellingham, that we allow bid wars to go on for stalls that put people out of work.
I'm responding more to what Marine Service Master Inc. is saying. They want very specific slips, right? And they're going to provide a number of jobs. And they're going to come in here with some employees, and they've got a reputable business because they've proven that business model. And they're going to create work for the waterfront. And they clearly have seen those slips that they identified in their email as being more valuable to them. I want to make sure that we do right by our ratepayer. So if they come in, we have charged an appropriate amount. They're still going to come in. They're going to have their jobs. They're going to have employees. They're going to still have to service their boats and create the economic opportunity that you just described. As a matter of fact, anybody who goes in there under those terms is going to do the same thing. They're going to have employees and they're going to have those jobs. I just want to make sure that we're doing right by right by the taxpayer.
And what are we going to do about the displaced people? Who's going to be displaced? Somebody's going to have to give up.
Well, but if they're bringing their own job, if they're bringing jobs in, it's not necessarily a displacement. Because they're doing the same.
It is if you put the other people out of work.
They're doing the same. They're going to bring people in and put them to work. Maybe they'll hire the same people. I don't know, Bobby. It's a market.
May I make a comment here by chance? This is Mike Houston.
Go ahead.
Sure, Mr. Houston. Go ahead.
I happen to know Marine Service Center people, and in fact, Dan Cryer, their salesperson, called me and asked me, he didn't know the harbor. He said, what slips are going to be reasonable for us to get? And so I was the one that advised him on specifically which slips might be useful for him. And I can tell you that it really had little to do with anything other than those were they bring in a variety of boat sizes, mostly 40 to 50 foot boats. So they needed some 50-foot slips. Those were simply the closest 50-foot slips to where their office was. If they went down the dock further, some of the other 50-foot slips, I don't think it's going to make enough difference to them to change the pricing any. This was purely, I believe, issue of convenience. And along the same lines, the specific slips that we requested are not close in. They were specifically requested by us because we have a very specific need. We're trying to, we've got currently a very large cruising catamaran that's got a 23-foot beam on it, and it's sitting in a gate 5 slip and creates a situation where you can't put a boat very wide next to it. So we were looking for end ties where we can put the large catamarans and have them fit into the harbor. So it's not just purely an economics issue. This is a lot of times an issue of what will go where and actually work. That's all. Thank you.
And so, Mike, you have to admit that there are some slips that are more valuable to a company than others.
I don't know if I'd call them more valuable. I'd simply say they're more functional. I'm making it work in the gate 5 slip, but it's not very it's not a very good use of space. I've got a 39-foot boat and a 56-foot slip because it's the only slip around wide enough for it to fit in.
Which makes the bigger slip more valuable.
So, Commissioner Bell, let me point something out that Mr. Houston just said. He was going to move one boat out of a stall to an in tie so that we could put another boat in that slip. So we're increasing our moorage there by him moving the wide boat out of that one onto an in tie. So that's better for the port. We open up another slip for somebody to tie up.
Oh, it's a love-hate relationship I have with you, Bobby.
And I guess my other question on this is, what is the administrative process to make a differentiation based on some market approach here? It's already pretty complicated for us to keep a lot of different variables moving in this harbor. There's a lot of competing needs. There's a lot of different structures that we have to work with. And I don't see the need to introduce any more complication.
And commissioners, if we are going to go that route and look into that, I would suggest we do that during the rate setting process, which is in front of us, and it's going to happen in the next 6 months. We're going to be looking at all marina rates. And that seems like a good time to have both the MAC and the commission engaged in a discussion about differential rates, not just within Squalicum Harbor, but also between Blaine and Squalicum Harbor. So on that note, I'm going to ask the commission if we can proceed with conversations with Mr. Houston and other interested parties along the lines of temporary utilization of those slips, and the port will also put a little bit of a marketing and a phone call effort, just cold calling some of the other charter companies in the Seattle area to see if they have interest in coming up here.
That was Rob's polite way of saying, shut up, Ken. But I agree with that, and I think the MAC should really take a look at this.
Yeah. And I'm fine with that. Rob, I would like to assign you something else. We've talked about dry stack storage before, and we're clearly seeing that we have a need for increased storage in our harbor. There's a lot of demand, and I would like to see a proposal for what is the easiest pathway for us to develop some dry stack storage somewhere in the harbor to give us another relief valve to create more opportunities for people to store their boats so we can create some revenue, some jobs, and some other opportunities for people to participate in our harbor.
I would point out, Commissioner Shepard, though, that I believe the dry stack storage size vessels are not the issue.
Yeah, I know they're not the big. Yeah, we've got the most demand for those 50, 40 plus foot boats. I get that. But I think there's still that demand issue. We've got a full harbor either way.
So,
Yeah, Commissioner, we'll be sure to look into that. I've had conversations with some local businesses about the dry stack storage and what locations that can go. It's going to be a bit of a capital project, but obviously we're seeing boat demand increasing, not decreasing, which is against what the projections have been for the last 5 years. I think a lot of the pandemic caused that, but clearly it's an issue, and we'll look into it and get you more information on that.
And Alan, my request of you is when you go to the MAC with this, I'll make the analogy of a supermarket. When you go down the supermarket and you go through the cereal aisle, the people who have eye-level access to cereal, they pay a premium for that shelf space. Bobby, stop.
I'm trying this minute.
And the people and the cereal on the bottom shelf, they don't pay that premium, but there's a value to that premium space. And cereal companies are willing to pay that in a supermarket. And it's a really horrible analogy, but I will say that we have slips that are more valuable than others. And I would love to have the MAC take a look at this and have them come back with some recommendations for how we can allocate those slips properly, and then also come back to us with how we can fill up Blaine and get all of those slips filled in Blaine and get the waiting list reduced. Thank you, Bobby, for your patience.
Commissioners, anything else on this subject before we move into the next one? There wasn't any action requested here, just maybe head nods that my suggestion of making the sales effort and working with the merchant leaseholders was okay.
I'm good with that, Rob. I think it's a good idea. And Ken, I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I just want to be careful how you do it or how we do it, if we do it, that we don't hurt people.
Understood.
Okay. Looks like we're ready for presentation number 2, funding for Port Roberts Ferry and update.
Good evening, Commissioners. Don Goldberg, Director of Economic Development. This, as Commissioner Shepard said, is a 2-part presentation. Tiffany Simone has done an incredible job in a very short period of time organizing the ferry reservation system, cancellation system, and she's going to give you an update on that, and then I'll follow with a little update on the border.
Thanks, Don. This is Tiffany, Meetings and Events Supervisor. So there have been a few questions in the last couple commission meetings, so we thought we'd just give an update all at once here. As you know, it's been a partnership. We started running the ferries August 25th and have been running it about twice a week since then. Partnering with San Juan Cruises, Drew Schmidt and his crew, Drew's crew, as I like to call them, and WTA, offering additional routes from the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. It's been a fantastic partnership. Honestly, I can't thank those other stakeholders enough for kind of jumping on the bandwagon quickly. So far to date, this was as of last week, we had 1,300 passengers sign up. We've canceled 3 as of last week. Now it's 4.5 due to weather. We plan on running this through December, weather permitting. We have schedules out now through November, but we're seeing cancellations come more often. And so December and January, we may see more cancellations there. Or until the border reopens, which I'll let Dawn speak to that. I think that's about it. Do you have any questions for me on the logistics portion?
Okay. Then if there's no questions, I'll give you a little brief update on where we stand on the international border. Currently, the border is closed until November 21st. Every month, we seem to get an extension. I am still part of the border task force, where we have people from both sides of the border, Border Patrol, sheriff departments, public officials. And at this point, both sides of the border have said that there's no expectations of the border opening soon. There's no commitment dates of opening, and there doesn't seem to be any real solutions moving forward. There are some discussions on lessening the restrictions for family members, but nothing has been confirmed as of this point. And as I've said before, the talk behind the scenes is that that the border will probably stay closed through March, but there's no written confirmation on that. Currently, of course, being a county that is a border county, we are getting hit much more than other counties in Washington relating to the effect of the border. Approximately 11% of Whatcom County's sales tax comes from Canadian residents. So that's a very big hit to our tax base. And approximately 85% of the border crossings are Canadians coming to the U.S. and 15% are U.S. residents going up to Canada. So it's hitting our side much more than it is the Canadian side. I do have good news in terms of, and I don't really know why, but in the last 3 months or 4 months, our team has had more interest of Canadian companies, manufacturers, relocating to Whatcom County than we've had in the last 3 years, probably put together. It's very weird that during a pandemic with a recession and the numbers that we're talking about, why we would see this growth. The only things that are slowing us down from placing these companies are the 2 things that we have been working on, and that is affordable housing and industrial buildings and land that are ready either to occupy or to be built on. We have a tremendous amount of industrial land that's raw, but it has a lot of repair on it, like wetlands or it's not in the UGA. And so, and then we have a significant acreage in Cherry Point in the county that we're trying to work on. So John, Gina, and I all are working with clients on looking to expand or relocate here. It's very exciting. It brings positive stuff to us after working on COVID all day. But we're currently working on trying to find industrial space for, I believe, about 5 manufacturers. So that's all my update. It's not very deep. There really isn't that much new information. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Don, it's not a surprise to me because with the border issues, it's been clear that if you've got a U.S. operation, it's much easier to deploy resources in the U.S. So having a company come from Canada and site here gives them a foothold in the U.S. and they don't have the cross-border issues. So I think that's a logical reaction to what's happened with the border closings. On that same note, I've got a pool at my office, and the consensus is it's going to be July, August before the Canadians open that border at any rate. Secondly, the Business Advisory Committee put a housing proposal before the Whatcom County Council that would have changed the paradigm and changed the dynamic for housing. And that was essentially rebuffed. I would like to see that brought back from the committee and reintroduced because it addressed directly the issues we're talking about when it comes to housing. And I honestly believe that they did not give it a fair hearing. And I believe the issues and the responses in that Business Advisory Committee recommendation would go a long ways towards alleviating some of the housing issues you discussed. And then I also would like to see the city of Bellingham involved more directly with that committee to help us with those issues. They have been virtually non-existent in those committees the last couple of meetings. Kelly Linville used to attend regularly when she was mayor. I would like to see somebody from the city begin to do that because I think you're right. The housing issue is a big deal on this, and we need to get that kicked into gear.
Commissioner Bell, I'm glad you brought that up. We are, the county council, the county business and commerce committee is actively bringing it back. Executive Sidhu has written a letter, a very in-depth letter emulating the position of the committee to the council and is fully supporting it. And so we are working on that. And I have begun working with the city of Bellingham on exactly what you're talking about. I've had 3 meetings in the last 3 weeks with the planning department and the mayor on addressing the housing issue and getting more dense housing as well as more freestanding homes available. And we're in the process of internally working on a way in which we can accomplish that.
So I would echo Commissioner Bell's request, and I understand what you said, Don. And I would also add that I think it's about time our government officials in this county dropped their party agendas and started working for the people and solve the issues we have at hand instead of the issues they think are important to them, and start doing their job.
And I agree. And I think we have, we have 8 municipalities if we count the county, and each one is doing a little different type of job. They all have similar issues. I would say Bellingham, of course, is the main city and pushes often people out to the areas, the other cities. And I think we're coming up with some very positive, exciting opportunities. One of the things that the city of Bellingham is up against is there are very there's a few owners that own the majority of the land that is available for residential development. So without those parties being willing to develop those properties, it limits them. But we are working on alternatives to compensate for that. And I do have to hand it to Mayor Seth that he has been very open and supportive of making some changes.
On that note, urban growth areas are there for a reason. We're seeing sprawl in the county because we've limited what we can do in the city of Bellingham. We're not limiting sprawl based on the public policy that we currently have in place. It's just going to other cities, and it's still sprawling. And there are urban growth areas that we can accommodate here in the city of Bellingham that we can better manage. Had a meeting with Mulyat today, and he said, essentially, the only thing that's being built right now are apartment buildings. There is a 30% decrease in the number of condos being bought because developers are not building condos for liability reasons. So the only thing we're seeing in the city of Bellingham are apartments. We're missing a fundamental portion of our economy. The single-family home and the single-family unit is something people desire, and it's driving up the price because there's a lack of supply. And supply and demand is an economic reality. I can't get past the fact that we don't have people willing to listen to that business and economic development group and expand into areas and provide a product that people want to buy. Families don't want to live in apartments. They just don't, and they're driving up the price of housing in suburban areas. And it's just crystal clear to me that we just need to figure out how to improve that. We could do an amazing thing as support if we could just put our public pressure in the right areas so that we could influence those public policies, so that we can bring employers in. I don't know how many employers we're missing because we can't provide the single-family home that they want for their families. And I'm sad about that. So speech done.
Actually, as concerned as I am about that, Commissioner Bell, I'm actually more concerned that we are unable to expand the businesses that already exist here. And if they can't expand, they leave.
Yes.
And those are the exceptional businesses, the ones that are doing well. You either grow or you shrink. You never stay the same. And so my job, of course, is to, before I bring a company into the area, I want to make sure that the companies that are here have the ability to expand.
I can name 3 companies off the top of my head that have moved their operations to other states because there's housing available. They didn't expand here because there was not. That's
I don't think people are opposed to living in density housing, but one of the main factors that we miss if that density housing is just apartments is there's no equity model for people to be able to have a positive return and really see their home as part of their economic future. And so that's where we're missing with that density model that has a home ownership component. And we've got limited space. We've got to protect our farmland. And so we've got to look at models that create density. And that's something that is, I would love for our office and Don's team to have additional suggestions on where we can bring some of the resources of local government to make those density housing models that have a home ownership component that enable people to bank that equity, invest, get a return, and be able to have that as part of their economic future. And I don't think people are opposed to living in density, but we're seeing a lack of that being built right now.
Well, Commissioner, part of that solution may be a legislative push to change the laws that make it onerous to build condominiums, which is a much smaller and more affordable unit than a single-family home. But right now, builders won't do that. The risk and the laws are just too against them, and much more so than in any other state. So if we can make apartment or condominium ownership part of the game plan, that might address that equity issue.
I agree. I've seen condominium owners sued for multiple years for multiple millions of dollars over flaws in a parking structure. So it's more convenient for them to turn that into an apartment building for 10 years and not sell it as condos. And so you don't get that ownership that, Michael, you were talking about. So those liability issues are real.
Yeah.
One of the other discussion points was cluster housing, which is kind of the condo killer. It's small homes on small lots where you have common areas, but you have a freestanding home and ownership. But currently in Bellingham's planning ordinance, all the homes would have to be pre-sold in order to have that cluster zoning. So we're talking about removing that. So I have to say that we're talking at the highest level at the city. They're all sitting down. They're very open right now. And we're moving quite fast on trying to make some changes. And the small cities are having the same issue now. It was Bellingham maybe that pushed the housing out to the smaller cities. But now all the small cities are having very low vacancies, and their prices are going up as well. So this is it's not only our region, it's a problem that's happening to other communities like us. But I do think there are some answers. There's some ways in which planning can make it easier to get through, and there's some zoning changes that the city is considering.
Well, do keep us informed on this, Don. You know, I always think government really can only impact quality of life for people and the cost of living in a couple ways. We can try and address housing prices and wages and jobs. And we all know that we can't snap our fingers and make more jobs or snap our fingers and increase wages. And local governments are recognizing that we can engage in housing, because that's, for most families, that is the single largest source of where their income goes on a monthly basis. And if we can work to drive that cost down to make that housing more affordable, we all know that clear benefits are there.
Office and retail vacancy has gone up during the pandemic, but industrial vacancies have actually gotten tighter. And so that's another issue that's very dear to me, is not only do we have to house people, but we also have to be able to offer manufacturers and businesses a place to do their work. And right now, our community does not have spec builders or spec land developers. And so that's something that I'm going to really focus in on.
So Don, you just spoke to that. We don't have spec builders or spec land people. Do you think it has to do with our permit processing in Whatcom County, how slow it is and how long it takes, and people won't invest their money for 2 years to try and get some kind of return? Do you think our permit processing is a big hurdle, or permit process is a big hurdle for people to come here?
I think it is at times, but I don't think it has anything to do with speculative building, because based upon speculative building, you normally have more time. But I just don't think we have any large industrial developers here that develop land or buildings. So the developers typically build one-up buildings for users, and they don't come in. We don't have the Trammell Crows and the large industrial development companies, and we're right on teetering on that size where they would come into our market.
So how long, do you know offhand what it takes to, how long is it, if I wanted to build an apartment complex or a small condo complex with small condos in it, how long would it take me to permit that?
A year at the minimum, and 18 months more likely.
Yeah, it depends on the city, whether it's in which city, whether it's in the county. It depends on the land. If it's very simple land and it's flat and it has no wetlands, the process is much easier. But we have very little amount of land that doesn't have some issue with it. The city of Bellingham, if you have a freestanding lot for a home to be built on a standard lot, they guarantee you a 2-week turnaround.
Just for perspective, it took us a year to permit a bathroom.
Yeah, this is what I'm getting to. Everybody's worried about the housing and all this stuff and the cost of it, but nobody's at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is our permitting processes, and it slows everything down. And I have family that's left this county and gone to Oregon because they can farm and and the permits and everything down there are done in a much faster, easier way and a hell of a lot cheaper. So we've got some issues a little deeper than what kind of houses to build. It's if you can build them and afford to get the permits and afford to sit on your money that long, waiting to find out if you can build the house. I think we've talked about this before, and it just gets swept under the carpet.
Well, that's why they told you they were leaving, those family members, Bobby. That's not really why they left.
And it depends.
I took a shower.
It really depends on the community and the product. In my experience, I mean, because I moved up here from Oregon, if you went through the building process in Portland, it makes ours look easy.
Well, we've got a lot in the watershed, Lake Whatcom watershed, and they're already $90,000 into a 5,000 square foot lot. So when you think about the permitting and process, and they're already 90,000 in, that doesn't account for the cost of the lot itself and the house on top of it. So you're going to have a $750,000 million house on that lot before they get to sell it. That's just wrong. By the way, was this on the agenda?
Yeah, we're at the Point Roberts update.
Yeah. we're fairly
So I have a question about Point Roberts.
far from that topic here. Yeah.
Couple of questions. Once, I think last meeting, Rob, I asked if you were gonna speak to I forget his name, about diverting into Bellingham and the weather's tough and they can't make the long run. Was there a response on that?
Yeah, right now we're trying the shorter hours thing. When we get into December, I think we'll maybe look at Blaine, just because the daylight is so onerous. But yeah, we're going to make sure there's all the options available. As you may know, the ferry was canceled today because of weather, both runs. Yesterday we canceled this morning's run. We were hopeful we'd be able to get the afternoon run in, but it just kept getting worse up there. So we're running into weather and daylight hours. But the port's commitment, per the direction of the commission, is to get that ferry running either to Bellingham or to Blaine as often as possible.
Okay. Some news about Point Roberts. For the first time in I don't know how many years, there's a fish buying station in place, and one of our local residents here in Bellingham, Doug Carlberg, and a company that he works for, are buying chum salmon across the dock in Point Roberts, and they actually opened up the restaurant, and their fishermen have been in there, and they've been doing some business there. So with all the bum stuff that's been going on there, there's a little ray of light that there was a little injection of some money into Point Roberts' economy and some action going on there that hopefully will carry on for the next few years.
Oh, you got to love Carlberg, right?
Yeah, nice job, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Good work. Okay, anything else on this topic? Okay, we'll move on to our last presentation. Got Brian Keenan and the compressor building project update.
Hey, Michael,
Yeah,
can I make a request? Can we take
Sure.
a 10-minute break now and come back to public comment and then do this right after?
sure. I'm happy to accommodate that. We'll be back in 10 minutes and do our public comment and then wrap up with this. Okay.
Thanks.
This meeting out. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Nobody here, sir. No one at the admin building.
All right, and are any of our guests on the Zoom meeting interested in providing public comment? Yes, Mr. Taylor? All right, anyone else we can put on our list? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and reconvene, and we'll start with public comment and then move on to our last presentation. Mr. Taylor, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm Lothar Taylor. I'm one of the other partners with San Juan Sailing and Yachting. Mike Houston spoke earlier, and he and I coordinate. One of my functions in the company is to manage all the slips we have and what boat sits where, and are they all compliant with slip, fit, size requirements, that sort of thing. So just a couple things that I'd like to circle back around to in our communications to the port and the commissioners. We've had several needs and we've expressed those. One that in all the discussion today, I think is kind of getting lost a little bit and strikes me as a fairly simple decision. And that is, we currently have a small allocation of slips at Gate 3 on the G East slip. And those came about to us long before me, but they are designated as recreational slips. And yet we're using them in a commercial purpose. And there's a mirror image equivalent set of slips on D East, Delta East, that are commercial slips that are part of this bundle that got turned back to the port as of the demise of Bellingham. So it strikes me as a pretty simple decision to say, hey, let's get San Juan out of the recreational slips and put them into these equivalent commercial slips. I believe they're the same size and the same number, and at least get those two groupings closer to the ideal use plan. So that was an item that we communicated, and I just want to re-emphasize. It seems to me that's something that the group could consider and move on without getting it bundled into all of the other discussion.
Mr. Taylor, if I can, this is Rob Fix, if I can just comment on that really quickly. That's always something we've considered doing, and I'm sorry we haven't emphasized that enough, but we have always thought that we'd reallocate the slips to kind of true that up, if you will, to give you the slips that are in the commercial and give the slips that are in the recreational.
Okay, real good. To Commissioner Bell's comments about market basing the slips, I don't have any fundamental issue with that, but as just an observer, I think it could become quite complex if we start zoning slips, say like the A West slips versus E West slips, and putting different pricing on those when they're the same size slips. It could be quite complex to manage allocation of the next slip when it's like, okay, we got another 40-foot slip for you, but that's in the price category A versus price category B. So I would hope, be it either as a recreational person or as a business person, that there is an appropriate registration of a slip has a certain cost associated with it. Finally, my understanding is there's an allocation process today when a slip becomes available in the commercial grouping that there's some priority rotation scheme. And so I just want to remind the group that whether there's going to be a pricing change or reallocation about how pricing is done on slips going forward at the next pricing review cycle, please remember that there's an allocation process that's been used in the past, and perhaps it would be appropriate to put that mechanism in place and let the pricing be what the pricing is when you decide what you want to do. That's all I had for comments.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate it. Appreciate your comments as well. Anyone else interested in providing public comment? Going once, going twice, and gone. All right, thank you very much. And we will move on to our last presentation. This one is compressor building project update, and Mr. Keenan.
Good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Brian Keenan, project engineer. Just wanted to give you a quick update on one of our projects that we're working through the design and permitting and looking to put out to bid here soon. This has two elements to it. It's demolishing the former GP West compressor building out by the ASB and the 1000F street warehouse. The other element is repowering the dockside pump station over on the former GP dock. And the reason these two projects are related, the electrical feed to the pump station actually comes from the tissue warehouse into the compressor building. There's a little graphic here to describe spatially what these two projects, where they're located. But the electrical feed comes from the tissue warehouse into the compressor building, where there's some aged electrical equipment. Then it comes back out underground, feeds the outfall building at the ASB, I guess the westerly end, project westerly end of that, if you will. And then the other feed actually comes under the waterway to feed the dockside pump station on the former GP dock here. Anyway, just a quick project summary here. So we've got $350,000 in the 2020 budget. A little bit of the background I described a little bit. So the compressor building housed the equipment necessary to aerate that basin. And that was decommissioned in 2008 when the port took over the facility from GP West. The building is in really quite bad shape, which is why we're wanting to do this work. And then just to highlight, that pump station is a critical facility, and it is fed from the compressor building. So this project will look to repower that from the new power infrastructure along Granary and Laurel, and decommission that underwater conduit and cable. So the scope of work is, as I've described, repower that pump station, give that a new, good, reliable feed from the new infrastructure in Granary and Laurel. There is an element of asbestos abatement in the compressor building itself. Then we need to reroute the electrical feed outside of the building to bypass that equipment inside the compressor building, demolish the building, and then we're looking to grade that building footprint and avail a little additional area for lease out and around that area. A little bit more on the project summary here. So here are some photos of that old building. The equipment in there is kind of interesting, and we're looking to retain a couple of these elements for some historical context of what the GP mill provided for this community. But along the way here, so there's actually been quite a bit of coordination on this project, trying to coordinate the work with the tenants around the area, and our real estate team, I think, has done a really good job communicating what we're trying to accomplish out there and the potential timeframes. We've got on the GP West side, we've got the Harcourt residential project that we're trying to coordinate that work and that power feed right along next to Harcourt, and also the city parks, the Waypoint Park trail expansion project is also located near where we're looking to repower the pump station from. There's also the Central Waterfront cleanup effort that's underway. So we're trying to coordinate, how that what's the vision for that area post cleanup, and make sure that what we're installing for the needs of this project are congruent with the goals of the cleanup. So let's see, the expected outcome of this project is we've got more reliable pump station over at the GP dock, and a little bit additional area where this compressor building will come down. And as I mentioned, retain some of these industrial artifacts that we've done in various elements of the GP West property. Next steps, looking to bid this still this year, here in Q4, and there's some lead time on the electrical components required for the work. And so hoping to have the construction completed in Q1 or Q2 of 2021. That's my brief update on this project. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, I've got a question, Brian. How long do we intend to keep using that pump station to send water over to the ASB?
So that's a good question. So with the Whatcom Waterway Phase 2 cleanup, as you're aware, we're still in the early phases of that. The pump station will remain until the ASB is effectively decommissioned. So when we no longer have that facility. So what we're thinking at the moment is that to manage the stormwater from the Log Pond area and the other areas of the GP West property that aren't ready to be tied in to the new city infrastructure, we're anticipating some other stormwater work. So one outcome could be that we permit and install a new stormwater outfall that would replace this pump station. But as I mentioned, we're still fairly early in the process. But if the schedule holds that we're looking at the moment and the funding, everything works out well, it could be a few years longer at this point.
Hey, Brian, you talked about conduit and power. When you say removing conduit and power, what conduit is there, and what are you talking about removing?
Oh, okay, yeah. So the dockside pump station, if I go back to the prior slide, so there is an underwater, there's actually underwater conduit and cable feeding from the compressor building here. I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yep.
But it comes along the ASB berm. It daylights below the bridge here, goes under the waterway, and comes up below the dock into the pump station.
So do you envision that we may need that conduit in the future? We're not looking to remove the conduit, but we would decommission the cable that's in it. So we've contemplated actually pulling the cable from the conduit as part of this work. It's a very old cable, and it's generally good practice to pull that out when it's decommissioned. But that is one element that we're evaluating as part of the project. But you would leave the conduit in place.
Leave the conduit in place, and whether or not you cap it or fill it full of sand, or there's a couple different practices that you could
it's there.
implement
You may need it, right, down the road.
Exactly.
You could.
So just
you could.
leave it.
There's actually a whole bundle of conduits as well as pipes going under here. In total, there's probably, I think it's between 10 and 12, ranging in size from 42-inch down to, I think it's 6-inch or 8-inch, something to that effect.
You'll never put a new conduit over there. So we might as well keep what we've got. And I wouldn't fill it. I wouldn't do anything else with it. I'd leave it and make it available.
Yeah.
Right.
So I have a question for you, Brian. When you pull that wire out,
Sure.
you're going to run something through so you can pull something back the other way, or how are you going to work that?
Yeah, we could. That's exactly right. So you could attach a pole pole, not a string, but forgetting the term they use for these your pole tether, basically. So that is one thing that we could do. There's I think there's actually another decommissioned cable in place already. So I think that there's a couple of candidates, I think.
Right. Well, I'd certainly like to see things like this kind of brought to the commission's attention before decisions are made by staff just to jerk a cable out of it, fill it up, because I think, as Commissioner Bell pointed out, that might be used in the future. We don't know what we're doing over there yet. So I would certainly not want to block off an avenue to get something over there if we needed to.
Understood.
Other than that, I have no more questions.
Any other questions or comments here? All right. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
So, commissioners, you want to do this year?
What this year?
That demo?
Yes. Sorry, was that a question for me, Commissioner Bell?
Yeah. No, it's also
Yes.
for my commissioners.
I see.
Okay, what was the question, Commissioner Bell?
The question is, do we want to do this in the year like it's planned?
Yeah. Is it necessary this year? Sorry, Rob.
Is there a reason not to do it this year?
Is there a reason to do it this year?
Absolutely. The building's falling apart.
And we can get leasehold ground back, right?
Right. We'll have more ground to lease over in that area, which is industrial property. Right now, it's just got a building sitting on it.
If we put it off, it's likely to go up in price.
Well, it's going to affect the cash flow whether you do it in 2020 or 2021. From that perspective, it makes no difference. So I would advise we do it sooner than later.
Yeah. I don't have any problem doing it this year.
If I could add to that, commissioners, so the pump station, the cable feeding that pump station is quite aged, and we'd certainly have better reliability repowering it. And the electrical equipment that is in that building, I guess if there is interest in prolonging the project, I think we'd want to look at probably repairing part of the building to make it safe so that we can maintain that equipment.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bell, your reasoning?
It's a 20,000 foot view. If we're going to spend $350,000, is this where we spend it? And I always have to approach this with that view. So if I've got 350 grand, is this where I spend it? And is it going to bring back the value if we spent that 350 grand somewhere else? So I make that question a part of my inquiry on all these things. I understand it needs to be done now, but if I were going to spend 350 grand on doing something, would it be that now? And I understand it's going to cost more later.
Well, I think with what Brian said about the repairs that would have to be made to leave it there, if I understood him correctly, plus the cost of doing it later would be a fairly significant increase in dollars.
Yeah, just so you know, Bobby.
Miscorrecting.
Yeah, Carrie's agreeing with you.
That's correct.
All right.
No, it's good, Ken. It's a good questioning on your part. I'm just saying that, if you got something aimed at, you think that we need to do something with the money that.
Yeah,
I'm
quite
missing.
frankly, as commissioners, we're not in the day-to-day, right? That's Rob's job. We're
Right.
here to do the overview. So if we look at
Right.
this at any other way than 20,000 feet, we're not doing our job. We leave the on-the-ground stuff to Rob. And And so when I look at this and I say, if I'm going to spend 350 grand on something, is this where I really want to spend it? And I look to Rob to tell me that. And it's a gut check for me. At the end of the day, I trust Rob with everything, with all these decisions right now. And so I say yes, but I just have to ask it.
I think it's a fair question to ask, and if the commission's more comfortable with it, there isn't a great, unless Greg and Brian want to jump in here and tell me otherwise, I don't think there's a great need for speed on this one. So if you'd like us to come back with and say, okay, here's what it's going to cost to repair and what that means over the next 3 years versus tearing it down, we'll do that.
So repair for what?
To keep the building so it's safe and it doesn't fall down and kill somebody or damage equipment.
So, yeah, if I may, so we
That's
could.
the answer I wanted. So,
I mean, aren't we going to do this either this year or the next? It's kind of a time sensitive one.
This is the Fram filter. You can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Yeah.
And Brian or Greg, jump in here if I've misstated anything, but my understanding is that building is going to require repairs in order for us to even go in there and access the equipment that's inside of it. And so for the safety of people and the equipment, we need to do something here.
This is Greg Nichols.
Yeah, it's an issue of keeping our folks safe that need to maintain that equipment. The repowering the pump station, I think is also, to me, it's a important thing that we do sooner rather than later, so we don't lose functionality of that. So we could pull the project apart, repower the pump station, do some temporary repairs on the building to keep it safe for our folks that need to maintain that equipment. To me, that's an option.
Greg?
And this is Greg Nichols, Senior Project Engineer, and I'm going to support what Rob said, which is this building's a hazard. That line that's running under the channel, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 4160 volt. Is that correct? So it's a high voltage cable. It's something that we really ought to be taken care of sooner than later. The building the floor has failed, the roof has failed. It's a danger.
Okay. I would have felt bad if I hadn't asked the question, so thank you.
Always worth the discussion.
Critical questions are always good. I appreciate that too.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything more on this one? All right. Hearing none, looks like we're on to other business.
We have a public meeting and a public hearing for the budget.
Oh, thank you very much.
And did you do public comment?
Stopped looking at my agenda here. Okay, so I am going to recess the public meeting and open a public hearing on the 2021 preliminary strategic budget. And I'm going to introduce our Tamara Sobczak before any public comments are made.
Thanks, Commissioner. Tamara Sobczak, CFO, Port of Bellingham. I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we got started. This is first of two public hearings on the budget. The draft budget was on the website last Monday, so it's been there over a week. And at our next meeting, we'll ask the Commission to adopt that draft budget as final, plus any changes that are discussed today or at our next meeting. And there are two changes that I know of so far. The first one is the CARES funding that Whatcom County awarded the port. That's about $238,000. That did not make it in the draft budget, but it'll be in the final. So that's money coming in. And then the $2.5 million project for the pavilion, in the draft budget and in the 2020 budget, it contemplated $250,000 outside funding for this phase of the project, and that funding is no longer available. So we'll have to take that out. So between the two items, it's pretty much a wash, and we still have a balanced budget as of today. So I wanted to make those comments before you open it up for public comment. So thank you for that.
I want to talk about the pavilion.
I thought there was going to be a joke now. Come on.
By the way, Tamara, could you introduce yourself with that new title again? Because that sounded great.
Tamara Sobczak, CFO, Port of Bellingham.
Hello. Okay, so let's talk about Let's
Stands
talk
for
about
Chief Financial Officer.
Let's talk about the pavilion. My understanding on the pavilion was that there was going to be a $250,000 or greater contribution from the nonprofits to subsidize some of that construction cost. And my understanding now is that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're correct, sir. And I met with the individuals that are going to be raising those funds. I think we've got a good direction here. It's a little disappointing that the project costs went up above what we expected them to. But I think we're going to have a good project, and I think the money will be applied appropriately to the phase 2 section of that project, which will allow much greater fish processing and other services and retail services out of there. But that phase 2 is, after I met with those individuals, I encouraged them to fully fund that phase 2. So instead of the port funding partial phase 1 and partial phase 2, the port funds all of phase 1, and then the donations fund all of phase 2. So our money goes in early, theirs comes in later.
It's okay, Ken.
Yeah, and that's fine with me. I would just not, for future, if we have money that we're not 100% sure on, it shouldn't be in the workup for the project.
And I agree with that, Commissioner. Right. And that's totally on me because I put that money in the budget as if it were a grant. And the reason we do that with grants that aren't 100% certain is because if we don't get the grant, we don't do the project. In this case, I put it in there as if it was a grant, but we never intended to not do the project. So I'll take responsibility for that. We don't deal at the Port of Bellingham with donations very much for these types of projects. So we didn't really have a robust process for doing that. But we learned our lesson here, and we'll go forward.
And I agree with Rob.
Rob, it's not on you, Rob. This isn't on you. It isn't on anybody. It's just the way things turned out. It's going to be a great project. We were going to do it, as you said, anyway. We're moving forward with it. We'll just suck it up, and next time we'll pay a little closer attention. But this isn't on anybody. The money's still going to be there. It's for a different part of the project. I'm good with it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the pavilion? Any other questions or comments for the strategic budget?
I have none.
Do we have any public comment related to the strategic draft budget?
I'm not public, but I'm impressed that our commissioners looked line by line enough to know that $250,000 was in there. That's good work.
We didn't. Come on.
Okay. Well, hearing none. Tamara, do you have anything more for us?
No, I don't. That was it. Thank you.
Okay. Then I will close the public hearing on the 2021 preliminary strategic budget and reconvene the regular commission meeting. We have left is other business. Commissioner Briscoe, do you have any other business for us tonight?
I have none.
Commissioner Bell?
No, but
you're muted.
I'm suffering from dementia, so I should have something. For the record, I have a word I have to say on every Port Commission meeting. Tonight's word was dementia. I had to get it in there. My daughters are looking for that word, so they'll be watching. I didn't say that.
But it's not nearly as impressive when you lay out the strategy.
I know, I had to say it because you guys were all looking at me like, what an idiot. So that was my word for the night.
I love the family game in this.
It is a great game.
It's fun. I wish I want them to know the word ahead of time.
Well, so they watch knowing I'm going to say something. And there have been times when I've said the word and you guys have looked at me like I'm such an idiot, right? Because it's such an obscure word. Mm-hmm. But tonight's was dementia, and I didn't have a chance to work it in before now. I worked it in now. There you go.
Well, at least you didn't forget and put it in some other 3D thing.
Well, I was going to mention it with you.
At least he didn't use it towards one of us.
Right.
Well, I don't have any additional items either, so I will let everyone go to constantly refresh and watch for election updates. and we will see you back in 2 weeks. Good night. Meeting adjourned.
Good night.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Mr.